Okay, we're talking with Nic Carah from UQ here about sensory media and brands. And if you want to learn more about Nick's work, there's a bunch of information here and a lot of conversation articles you can check out as well. But yeah, thanks for joining us and tell us a bit about yourself and your research.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, I guess I'm a media and cultural studies researcher, and I've been a researcher now for, well, it's funny to say this, but like I think 20 years this year.
Yep.
And so in a way, when I started out, I was looking at brands and how they were going and getting involved in our social lives more, and then that was starting to collide with digital media. So if you go back to 2005, it's like MySpace is there, but Facebook isn't in
Mm.
Australia yet. And so I started like in that period as social media started to develop, watching how brands went to social media as a place to kind of interact with people, particularly young people, and particularly in relation to the like cultural context of their lives. So, for me, I was really interested in like music scenes and how brands would show up in music scenes young people are a part of. Um, and then bit by bit, what that turned into was like tracking over time how social media platforms developed and how their kind of promotional culture, brand culture, creator culture became kind of a central part of the platform alongside its advertising model. So my story about social media is that they really are a kind of brand advertising kind of machine. They're advertiser funded businesses from the get-go, in a sense.
And
Um,
increasingly, your research kind of start to incorporate people that actually know about the nitty-gritty of behind the scenes and machines themselves, right?
yeah, that's right. So one of the things that starts to happen, definitely by the 2010s, is you've got platforms starting to do things like introduce algorithmic feeds. So if you go back to the mid 2010s, Instagram goes from having a chronological feed where you see every post in the order of who in your network has posted it, to an algorithmic feed, which is like using these automated models to choose what you see on your homepage. And those choices are really about they're really tuned to the attention economy of the platform. The platform's trying to use automated models to basically keep you in the feed for as long as possible, because the longer you're in the feed, the more advertising you're going to see, the more advertising that they can sell. And so that's one part of the automation I was interested in. And then the other part was the ad model itself, like how platforms were learning to target ads at us in much more sophisticated ways. And to understand that, what I kind of began to realize was you would need an account of like two things. On one side, the thing that media and cultural studies researchers have been good at for a long time, which is like, how do people use media in their everyday life? Like, what are people doing with social media?
Mm.
But the other side was this bit that was kind of new to media and cultural studies, which was the actual technical process of automation. Like, as we were using social media sites, yes, we were making content that we were sharing with each other, but that content also doubled as data that was starting to train these very big models. And so, to understand how that worked, you had to go and find out something about the models, which meant that I started talking a lot to, say, computer scientists and people in those kind of disciplines. We started creating and building kind of examples of the models that we would work with
Yeah.
in order to figure out basically how they worked.
Yeah. And so when talking to Dan Angus and in the course already, and like
Cool.
about aspects of this research as well, and he gave us some of those more technical aspects. Yeah, so we don't have to
We have to get
talk
there,
about them too
yeah.
much at the moment. So
But I'm
one
sort
of
of
the
like
things,
interested in how those two things collide,
yeah,
like yeah, and maybe just to say one other thing, I more and more think of the 2010s as like a training decade. Like at the beginning of the 2010s, these automated models are very rudimentary. At the end of the 2010s, they're super sophisticated. And it's like everything we did on social media fed them the data that trained them. Like what we were doing on social media in the 2010s, we were training automated models.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So tell me a little bit about what algorithmic brand culture is.
Right. So algorithmic brand culture is this kind of fusing of two concepts. Um, Ted Strifus's and Alexander Galloway's concept of algorithmic culture, and and then I guess Sarah Bannett Wise's concept of brand culture. And I was like, actually, these two things now got clicked together. Algorithmic culture is, use Strife's definition, this shift that happened where we began to delegate to machines judgments that once only humans could make.
Yeah,
Um, and so, once upon a time, only a human could say, hey, you'll like this song or you'll like this artist or this film. But now we've built these automated models that can kind of make that judgment for us in different ways to us, but pretty successfully. Um, and so that's algorithmic culture. Brand culture is like brands are not just like we see the ad on television, the ad goes into our brain, we go buy the product. Brand culture is actually we take brands and we use them as these symbolic resources. We incorporate them into our identities and lives. We use them as part of our own self-expressive projects of the self. Do you know, like
Yeah,
um, I say something about who I am because of the glasses I choose to wear, the sneakers I wear, the beer I drink at the party, blah blah
yeah.
blah.
That classic kind of taste classifiers and it classifies the classifier thing. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And so brands only can generate value if we pick them up and use them in our life. Like we make brands valuable because of the ways we use them.
Mm,
Um, and so that's brand culture. And I guess what I was kind of in this concept trying to think about is like social media brings these two things together because it enables a much more participatory kind of brand culture where we're actually incorporating brands into media. Our own social media posts begin to function like ads, et cetera, et cetera. And then that's all being turned into data that feeds these models that can then make recommendations and judgments and decisions
mm.
about us. So an algorithmic brand culture is where the kind of data processing power of media and the participatory affordances of media get kind of clicked together.
And in the research we're talking about today too, is a kind of another element brought into it in the sense that there's the digital stuff going on algorithmically, but you're relating it to what's happening in a material space like splendor in the grass.
Yeah, so this part of it became really important to me in the sense that I guess if you go back a while, pretty like if you go back to the 2000s, there's a lot of debate about like online space or virtual space and like real space and
Mm.
real culture. Um, and increasingly, um, I won't get this quote the right way around, but it's like, Preziato has this great quote about how we did think that like the direction of travel with digital media was that we would start to live in virtual environments, like the real world would get transposed into the virtual, but
Yeah,
actually it's been the other way around. The digital has been transposed into the real world.
yeah,
And so for me, a place like the music festival became a really useful site where you could think about this because digital media becomes a kind of key part of the infrastructure of a space like the music festival because it can do two things. One, capitalize on the productive activity of the festival. We become not just people enjoying the festival, we become people who produce content. And so if brands go up and show up there, they'll get caught up in our content production. But the music festival becomes what they call in the industry like a data generating event. So
yeah,
you have all these kind of, a festival, you have all these kind of affluent, cool kids there as they're kind of posting stuff on their social media platforms, chatting to each other about the festival. It's generating lots of data about them, their connections with each other, and that has value in the ad model and the recommendation model of platforms. Um, so the festival is a really concentrated example of that. But you can actually start to think about all sorts of public spaces, and in a way, like private spaces,
mm,
as now important parts of this infrastructure. Even in the way that we take selfies in our own bedrooms or bathrooms, they
yeah.
become these important sorts of stages or spaces in the brand culture.
Yeah, yeah. And so you move which I particularly like this kind of notion that what happens at these spaces from just participation in kind of everyday life or in events or whatever to this notion of participatory labor that kind of builds upon, the many other forms of labor have been theorized like free labor, effective labor, immaterial labor, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I love that you've got this quote because it's one of those little, sometimes when you're doing this sort of field work, you're going out in the real world, you're doing this kind of observational research, you see little artifacts in the world that kind of, they're kind of this tiny little thing that explains the much bigger piece, the much bigger puzzle.
Mm.
And so I remember this going to this music festival, Splendor in the Grass, I think RIP now. But there's this tiny little A4 sign on the gate that's like your entry beyond this point constitutes your consent to your likeness to be used for Virgin Mobile.
Yeah,
Anywhere, anytime, without litigation. Like,
yeah,
and
yeah.
it's just like cool. In we go.
Yeah, it's
But
amazing
it
how much
kind
the
of,
legal system supports all this, hasn't it? And so, and we
yeah.
talked a little bit elsewhere in the course, I think, about who owns your selfie kind of stuff, like, and it's not you.
And exactly, and it was kind of funny because what if you didn't consent? Like we just wouldn't be able to go in. I'm not sure they'd refund your ticket or whatever.
Yeah, yeah, that's
Um,
right. Yeah,
So, but the thing that the sign explained is like, yeah, you've bought a ticket to go to a music festival, but you're bringing value into the festival. You're bringing your likeness, which is a nice term actually, because it's like you're like you can play with it. Your likeness is kind of what you like and how how good you are at kind of producing affects like likability, I guess you'd say, or
Yeah.
enjoyability in the festival that other people will also enjoy. So you're gonna be one of thousands of people producing a sort of social atmosphere of affects, of feelings, of sociality that the brands in that festival are going to be able to capitalize on. And they've paid the festival hundreds of thousands of dollars to be there because you're there and you're a valuable laborer for them. You're going to be doing basically free work for them today
Yep.
by making their branded spaces cool and fun, by generating posts that you'll share on your Instagram page, and by generating data that'll enable them to kind of target you in subsequent ad campaigns or target people like you.
Yep.
And so you're an affective labor. You're a participatory laborer in the festival.
Yep. Yeah. Thanks. Well put. Yeah. So let's talk about this kind of stuff along the different kind of media infrastructure that's going on in these places, as well as the kind of themed spaces.
Yeah, so and what it's sort of interesting to look at this in the context of in a way post-COVID, the in a way the collapse of music festivals as a cultural phenomenon in Australia, and and I guess also the 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 full-on shift toward a very kind of screen culture. So I think in a way, a lot of that, earlier I said the 2010s was a kind of a training decade for training automated models. But I think we can also look back on it as an extremely experimental decade for experimenting with media and the affordances of media in public spaces and private spaces. And so I think in a way, you saw brands and festivals and technology companies like experimenting with stuff a lot more than I
Yep.
think we do at the moment. Um, where I guess all the experimentation that's happening now is with AI models. So it's almost like a lot of the capital that gets, the capital is being invested in experimenting with AI models now. But in the 2010s, there's a lot of capital being invested in the real world. And I think it's because in that decade, the problem you had to solve was how to get people to sort of take their devices out in the world, use them all the time,
Mm.
generate lots of content and data, how to basically build this web of connectivity through the whole society. And it's like having done that in the 2010s, we now have these flows of data and content that we can use to feed the AI models. Now let's invest the capital there.
Right.
Um, yeah, and so you'd see things like, I mean, yeah, the example you've got on screen is one of those really like it feels janky now. But as you went into Splendor one year, everyone would get a wristband, and the wristband had an RFID tag on it, and you could link the RFID tag to your Facebook account and your Spotify account. And then as you go around the festival or weekend, you can like swipe stuff, swipe at all these posts, and the tag is kind of recording your journey around the festival. And as you go see particular bands, it'll kind of keep track of it and it'll build a playlist of like every song you saw at the festival. And that's the reason that was like the incentive. Like do this task for us and we'll give you this cool customized playlist. But
Right.
they didn't really explain to people was every time you swiped, it would post on your social media account.
Yeah. Automatically
And
without your,
people
yeah.
realized until
Yeah.
they got home and looked at Facebook and it had like been like and they were like the daggiest posts imaginable. Like I'm having an awesome time at the Rubens right now or whatever.
Yeah.
Like it was
Right.
seriously cringy. But like that would never like no one would ever let freaking the Splendor RFID tag post to their personal social media profile now.
Right.
Like.
Yeah.
So these
Yeah.
are really funny experiments to look back on, but they're kind of you can see what they're trying to do. They're trying to build a media infrastructure where connectivity is kind of deeply woven into like all aspects of life. And I think in a way the smartphone has become the like
Mm.
default device
Yeah.
for all of that connectivity, and we carry it with us everywhere we go now.
And they were kind of pushing the boundaries of what they could get away with, right?
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like in technical ways and cultural ways. So brands were building kind of activations where they were encouraging, particularly alcohol brands, like encouraging really excessive forms of partying, posting photos and videos of people like super wasted in their activations, things like that. That you really, like are much harder to get away with now.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. And so tell us a little bit about like these three different ways that this kind of connectivity is engineered.
Yeah, so this is like a way of trying to schematically go, all right, like when we head out into a space like the music festival, but you could think about that as any kind of social, cultural, enjoyable space. that we go out and sort of hang out, enjoy ourselves. Um, we public space is kind of designed in order to generate a shared atmosphere, a sociality that, if it's a very commercial space, is kind of conducive or aligned with the brand values. So in the case of a music festival, the sponsored brands are kind of woven into the space.
Mhm.
They're these kind of themed environments that you're partying in. So you're not like just seeing ads either side of the stage. You're sort of in a branded space. You're hanging out
Yeah,
there. You're creating an atmosphere with the brand. And then the mediating bit is where the brand then prompts you to turn that experience into media that you share with each other. And this is a very 2010s thing. Like I don't think this works in the 2020s anymore because people don't really post much to their own social media profiles the way they did in the 2010s.
yeah,
But in the 2010s, everyone would like if you're at Splendor, you'd post heaps of photos of yourself during the weekend, to your own personal profile.
mm,
Um, so you're kind of incorporating the brand into your own story about the event.
yep,
And then all of that activity, as you post that content, as you interact with each other, doubles as data that the platform then collects and uses to train models. You become basically algorithmically recognizable to the platform.
yeah,
And I think what the platform say has at the end of the weekend is a map of how everyone at that festival is kind of proximate or connected to each other. And that's a really valuable map in the weeks and months that follow, as it can kind of track you as you go back out into your own lives and figure out who else you're connected with and who might share your interests and so on and so on.
yeah. Excellent. Thanks. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, hang on a minute. So yeah, and we spoke. I think we're talking with Dan in the next one about the kind of way that kind of these images are digitally classified, and there's that excellent paper you wrote with the machine that you invented to do that. But can you tell us a little bit about the importance of classification here and how
Yeah,
it
so
relates to
what I think
brands?
the important thing that I was trying to think about here is in an earlier kind of understanding of how these automated models figured things out, um, it would be very kind of discrete kinds of data that we'd have in our mind, like, well, they know how old I am or what my gender is or whatever because of what I entered in my profile, or they know who my friends heart because they've got my friends list, or if I follow the NBA, they know I like the NBA. Like it's those very kind of
Mm,
direct connections. And what we were trying to think about is like, okay, but like things like the thousands of images that we're posting to a site like Instagram, Facebook, when we used to post stuff there, um, are actually a really rich form of data. And so the question that Dan, who's a computer scientist, and I had was, like I was kind of doing this talk at school, and I'd shown an image of a brand activation at a festival where Strongbow had the cider brand had built this like 100-year-old sailing ship at the festival.
mhm,
And I'm like, this sailing ship is a really unique object
yep,
that and if you could recognize if a machine could recognize this ship as the Strongbow ship, then it's like a little beacon that says this person is connected to Strongbow and this festival somehow.
mhm,
And I was like, I wonder if a machine could recognize the ship. And Dan was like, I reckon I could build a neural network to test that. And so that's what we started mucking around with. And in these early experiments, we'd like collect every public image from Splendor, so Splendor would come along and it'd go for 3 days. We'd follow the hashtag, collect every image, publicly post to the hashtag, and that'd usually be like more than 20,000 images. And then we would like give those images to a neural network and ask it to organize them. So we wouldn't tell it what we were looking for. We wouldn't ask it to go and classify particular objects. We'd ask it to inductively sort the images into piles, if you like,
yep,
of similar things,
yep,
and then label them. And what we found was the network was really good at finding all the images of the Strongbow sailing ship, all the images of this art installation, all the images of this stage. And we're like, well, it can convert those images into recognizable patterns, and then it's easy for it to make the jump from there to connecting those patterns to particular brands or to particular individuals.
mhm,
Um, and so then you can start to think about our images differently and the way the targeting works quite differently. It's not like really particular things the model knows about you. It's these larger patterns of expression that you're embedded in. That's what it's learning about you, and that's what really makes the recommendation model, powerful.
yeah, yeah. Okay, yeah, and okay, and so. we move towards, and this, I know this is in your paper particularly, but this kind of increasing
Mm.
sense that these machines have this kind of sensory power. They bring together both the data, our emotions, our labor into this kind of one way of kind of classifying us. But the classification isn't always just us, is it? It's like a datafied self, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you've got this earlier concept of the data double
Mm,
around some of this literature, and I guess the way I've started to think of it is the concept that comes from Tao Fan and Scott Walk, or I guess they've used it for me best in relation to this topic of the concept of the proxy.
yeah,
So the model builds a kind of proxy version of us, and you might think about here proxy as kind of like an approximated version of us. But the logic that Tao and Scott really want to draw our attention to is proxy in the sense of proximity. So
yeah,
the model is using data to figure out who we are proximate to, who we're close to. And so even if it doesn't know much about us, if it can put us somewhere in the social system among people like us, it's like we might be a bit of a blank spot. But if it's got information of everything around us, then it has a kind of proxy version of us. And if it knows this about us, and then it can see it knows this about people around us, then it might predict we also share those characteristics in common. And so, it's never about the power of these models is not about what it knows about me as an individual. The power is how it kind of positions me proximate to others
yeah.
and then aggregates everything it knows about everyone around me.
Yeah.
That's the sensory power for me.
Yeah. And so I'll just leave that here, but kind of we'll talk in other parts of the course how, we've talked about how, selling stuff through brands or ads is one way that this is kind of being used, but others in terms of, discriminating data and
Yeah.
security and stuff like that is another key part of the course that I'll touch upon in another part of it. Okay. So to sum up, can you kind of just sum up quite quickly what's important here and maybe like where we're headed next in this kind of area?
Maybe two things. Like, I think what's important here is recognizing that participation is not just participation in the sense of expressing ourselves, it's participation in the kind of labor of producing data that trains machines. That's
Yep.
the kind of society that we live in. And then the other part is this like there's this now broader social logic that enables of the proxy. The way we are kind of known and acted upon by these decision-making models is not just about what's known about us individually, but what's known about us kind of proximate to other individuals that we've been kind of positioned near to.
Mm.
And that's a kind of shift actually in the way we like organize, I guess, social discrimination, decision making power, and so on.
Yep. Excellent. Okay. That's a great way to leave it. Thanks a lot, Nick.
Sweet. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.